Welcome to the Ukrainian Institute in London. Today, Svitlana comes to us in a new position as a newly elected Member of Parliament of the Verkhovna Rada in Ukraine. I think in terms of Svitlana, many of you know her for her civil rights activities and activists, especially in terms of what was done with Center UA, with CHESNO, with the Reanimation Package of Reforms, and with Stop Censorship over the years, and over the last 12 months with EuroMaidan, the activities that sparked off literally 12 months ago, and that were the spark that started the EuroMaidan revolution, the revolution of human dignity, and preceded all the events that we have still ongoing today. Svitlana, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Andy. Добрий вечір, дорогі друзі. Good evening, dear friends, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me thank you, Andy, for the organization of this evening. And also, I'm really delighted that you found some time and came this evening. I'm sure you have a lot of things to do, but I believe that still the interest is there, and everyone is looking at Ukraine and the latest development there. I would like, to be honest, start with a story that happened to me in the morning today. I have a very short visit, so I was trying to fit as many meetings as possible. So the main challenge I faced was to be in time and not to get lost, which is a real challenge to me, to be honest. And then yesterday when I put this announcement that I'm going to speak today at the Institute, I've got a comment, a post at my Facebook page that one man that I never met and didn't know about him, he said, I will come to the airport and will pick you up. And I said, well, look, it's too much, it's probably, you know, you have to find your time and so on. But he said, that's okay, don't worry. And so he did. He came to Gatwick and he spent his, I don't know, a couple of hours, and he paid for parking, and he waited until I get through passport control and so on. And it's a touching story. But why I'm telling you that? Because I believe that the whole shift of the paradigm of the relationship within the Ukrainian civil society is reflecting in this small and touching story. And what is it about? It is about the great change that we leave ourselves. Because I think that the biggest changes don't happen in Ukrainian politics. And it's not even on the legislative level. And it's not in economics. But it's about the societal relationship. The engagement and responsibility that we take as citizens increased just enormously. And this is what you can see on different levels in the country. First of all, I think the main characteristic is that Ukrainian society from a vertical system became a horizontal system. It's not anymore that we there down at the bottom are waiting some decisions from above and looking at the government and looking at the parliament as if they are gods living at their limbs. But we want to see them as partners, and we demand from them to be our partners. And you know, what we experienced in the last year, and that actually many groups all around the country, and even Ukrainians around the world, united themselves, formed these groups in order to perform some tasks or some functions that government was not able to perform, or couldn't, or didn't want to. And it starts from, you know, forming the military units, for example, military volunteer battalions, or supporting army with money, or building the shelters for refugees, or, for example, developing the reforms and writing the laws and drafting the laws. Well, one of the very bright examples that in last 8 months, Parliament adopted approximately up to 20 revolutionary legislation, And all these laws were drafted not by the members of the parliament, and not even by the representatives of the government, but by activists, by members of the non-governmental organization that existed before and that were working for them for a couple of years. And it's probably this characteristic is not usual, not usual for Western democracies. This is what is happening, what we see now is happening in Ukraine. A lot of expertise, a lot of values existing beyond the system, externally. But now with this EuroMaidan, with this window of opportunity, we receive this possibility to bring it in, this expertise and values and people who carry or fulfill these things. Well, I think that it's a very good foundation, this shift of the paradigm of the relationship, to erect our further house. And I wouldn't say that the walls are already there, but brick by brick, we try to build it. Well, I have to say that, of course, EuroMaidan finished in the streets. It didn't finish in our hearts and in our minds, but the main aim we have in front of us is to bring this culture of EuroMaidan into the offices of the new government. We always used to say, and I'm sure this proverb was very popular, that EuroMaidan was not about the new faces, but it was about new rules. And make the new faces by the rules, but not with the rules. And this is the challenge that is still there, and we have to work on it. Now, I would like to maybe talk a little bit about the results of these parliamentary elections and to reflect on how these results of these parliamentary elections bring us closer to this EuroMaidan into the governmental offices. Let me mention that 54% of all of the members of the parliament that make it to the parliament are completely new and they have never been to politics before. And it's an enormous, actually, number. And it gives us hope that these people will represent new culture and new approaches and will be in the avant-garde of the changes. Also, it's important to remember that 5 out of the 6 forces that made it to the parliament represent pro-European platform. And it's also important that we will make a strong coalition, a strong majority in the parliament that will be able to change, even to amend the constitution, so it means constitutional majority. Because many of the reforms that are in front of us, they will demand to change the constitution. Then also, interesting fact that approximately 30% of all those people who were running for these elections were under 35 years old. What does it mean? It means that we have a new generation knocking to the doors of Ukrainian politics. And it's also a good argument or a good characteristics of these developments in our country. Another fact that in the parliament we'll have 3 completely new parties. And it's Bloc Petro Poroshenko. It didn't exist before. Of course, many people who have been in the politics already will form this party. But nevertheless, it reflected this demand of the society to form new forces. Then Народный Front, the party of the Prime Minister, Mr. Yatsenyuk. And finally, the hope, I call it, the hope of the new parliament is Samopomich, the party that doesn't include any of the former politicians, any of the former member of the parliament, and is not supported by any of the big financial group. That important fact is also that we will not have no major force that would be able to decide itself or vote on the legislation itself. I mean, there's no a clear majority of one force, which is also very important because we need to bring this balance of the decision-making in Ukrainian politics. So I believe Bloc Petro Poroshenko together with Narodny Front will form this platform, this core, this spine of this coalition, and it will be very interesting to see how they find the agreements, how they find the compromises on all of these difficult questions and all of the difficult decisions. Now, the last but not the least, is that we also increased the gender balance, and it's not much, but still we will have 4% more of women in Ukrainian politics. Unfortunately, you know, we have mixed system, we have proportional majoritarian system, and unfortunately only 2 women won in the constituencies, only 2 out of 225. It still means that politics is it's a man, you know, deal, man matter. What is happening now in Ukraine? I'll give you a little bit of insight. As you know, a week ago, or a little bit more, we started to write our coalition agreement. And in the very beginning, I will be honest with you, it was a little bit clumsy. But when the first draft was introduced, well, then we had a very strong pressure from new forces, from new members of the parliament, and they started to demand from all the members of the parliament to involve them and to build some internal democracy, which was very important. So finally, I would consider it, I would evaluate this process of coalition agreement forming with a reserved optimism, I would say. Why is that so? First of all, because it is public. And it's really probably the first time in the Ukrainian history when the coalition agreement, a major document that will form the agenda for the next 3-5 years in Ukrainian politics, is being formed public. It's, once again, very important. Secondly, the coalition agreement is being elaborated together with the involvement of experts from different analytical centers and non-governmental organizations. I really can't imagine, like 8 months ago, or it's even more actually, 12 months ago, when Azarov, our former Prime Minister, would go publicly and said, you know, dear friends, we are making a coalition agreement, so please, we invite all of the experts to give their proposals, and tomorrow we will go again publicly and to show it to you, whether you have some criticism, we are ready to answer it. It would be just, you know, it's incredible. This is the story from the anecdote. So, but this is happening now, and I also think that it just proves the fact that civil society is being considered as a partner, but not the enemy anymore. Secondly, we really formed working groups. There are 7 working groups that are working on the coalition agreements with the components. Why is it important, actually? Because we consider it seriously. And all 5 forces that are involved in this coalition agreement writing is thinking what they put there. Why? First of all, because we would like to take the responsibility to each other. And then, secondly, we need to take this responsibility in front of the whole Ukrainian society. That what we wrote is actually not just a paper, but this is really what we are going to vote and we are going to implement. Now, what we need further? First, it's a strong leadership. We need leaders that would not just say that they are going to write these reforms and do these reforms, that actually are ready to do these reforms. And naturally we have our president, our prime minister, but I think we also have another leadership that's probably a little bit underestimated even by the president and by the prime minister. And this leadership is first in faces of those young politicians that made it to the parliament. They, I think, to some extent even, they act as internal opposition within those forces that made it to the parliament. And secondly, this leadership is being performed by the civil society. And the pressure that we have in the streets and at the press conferences and at our media, political TV shows and so on and so forth is very high. And this is, I think, what differs us from 2005, when we failed to fulfill the expectations of the Orange Revolution. I want to remind you that we actually had this chance. We had this window of opportunity 9 years ago. But why did it fail? Not because Yushchenko and Tymoshenko was that bad, but probably because society came back after the revolution to their kitchens with their TVs and continued to watch it and criticize them quietly at their kitchens, but didn't take this role of the continuation of monitoring and controlling. Now, second thing, what we need now is responsibility. And moreover, it's a shared responsibility. To be honest, none of the reforms that we are talking about now in Ukraine is an easy task. I would say even that we are choosing between bad and even worse solutions. And in order to take the decisions, we have to share the responsibility for these bad solutions. Because it's the only way to move forward. None of the political forces want to be criticized by the society, by the voters. But even, but only if we are ready to sacrifice with our rights, with our support, with our voting scores, we will be able to realize those reforms. Now, third thing that I have to mention is accountability. Accountability, I would call it a new concept in Ukrainian politics. It was always a word, it was always a term, but it was never the reality. So by disclosing the income statements, by disclosing the financial documentations on the campaigns, on the party, and so on, is a new step, is a new reality. Let me just remind you that 3 years ago, when we established a CHESNO movement, fair movement in English, it was done by a couple of journalists and activists. One of the demands was to our MPs to show their declaration on assets. But it was never the case when they did it. So for the whole history of Ukraine, for 23 years, the Ukrainian society never saw the income statements, the declaration on assets of our members of the parliament. And in the last 3 years, we even went to the court and we sued a lot of members of the parliament, including the pro-democratic opposition. Moreover, I have to say, when EuroMaidan already ended, and we asked our apparatus of Verkhovna Rada, of our parliament, so please show us the declaration on assets finally. They refused us. And it was a big scandal. So finally the speaker Turchinov, just in August of this year, made a decree, and finally we saw all the declaration on assets of our members of the parliament. It's just a small example of this resistance that we have, even of the new power, even of the new government that is there. It's not common, it's not usual, it's new. You have to disclose your information, you have to open up, you have to be transparent. This is what Ukrainian politics didn't used to. And finally, fourth thing that we have to talk today is, of course, reforms. In last 12 months, we managed to adopt a number of revolutionary legislation, and as I've said, it's about, for example, access to public information, and we were fighting for it for 4 years. It's about broadcasting system, public broadcasting system. It's a reform that journalists and media experts were fighting for already, I don't know, maybe 15 years. It was one of our obligations in front of the Council of Europe, the last one probably. There's another reform that we managed to adopt, is about anti-corruption and so on and so forth. But at the moment, we also maybe have to focus our efforts not even on the legislation and its adoption, but on the implementation of those legislation. Because what we see, that many laws remain beautifully written laws there. And we have to say, that we have to admit that it was not the reality before, and indeed, in order to advocate successfully for any of the laws. It was already a huge challenge. We could, as a civil society, we could fight for it for years and years. But now we have to think on how to implement these reforms that will be able shortly to adopt. Now, to what extent these reforms will be implemented, and to what extent Ukraine will be successful. Here I would like, of course, I can't avoid Russian factor and topic of Mr. Putin. I think that, of course, our further development will enormously depend on the situation, on the development of the situation in the East. And in order to deal with it, first thing that we have to do is to call the things with their right names. And what we have in the East is not aggression, is not civil war, is not crisis, but it's a real war. It's not a Cold War, it's a real war. And I think in order to deal with it, we have to also understand the nature of this war. You know that maybe we don't face the same situation that Czechoslovakia faced in 1968, when it was very easy to say who is the enemy. But very often it's not the Russian soldiers, but little green men, and not the tanks, but someone's BTRs are moving in the streets. But obviously that Russia is using different instruments and different means of this war. And it's about terror, and it's about falsification during the referendum and elections. And it's also a propaganda, brainwashing machine that is working very efficiently. And it's also cyber war, and it's intelligence, and it's counterintelligence. And it's also work of NGOs that are working very efficiently. And church is also an institution that is used as a mean in this war. And energy and economic factor, these all are those means that are being used by Russia in this war. What does Putin has in his head is difficult to say. I think one of the mistakes that we do is that we try to evaluate his deeds or his incentives and his actions in the system of coordinates, in the rational system of coordinates. But it's not the case. And I think that Angela Merkel, when she said that Putin lost his touch with reality, actually she was right. But we do understand that Putin doesn't allow Ukraine, he will allow Ukraine to, well, I want to say that Ukraine in his picture should be either Putin's or shouldn't exist at all. It's one goal that he has in his head. Another one is that we know that Russian world, Ruski mir, is that concept that he is dreaming about. And this is really that framework that he's trying to introduce and to fulfill. And I think that actually sometimes we didn't listen to him carefully, because for many, many years he was very clear of what he thinks and what he wants. And for example, when in 2008 he said to George Bush that Ukraine isn't country isn't even a country. I think he was just very very genuine, as he was during many other times. Well, now how to deal with it? I think that it's a really question that we don't know the answer to. And just a couple of days ago, we had the meeting of the Security Council in Ukraine. And from what we hear and from what we read after this meeting, that the President, Prime Minister, the whole political leadership understood finally that this war is not going to be ended in the nearest future. And the challenge is more serious than we thought from the very beginning. So this responsibility or this challenge is not only in front of Ukraine, but this is the risk in front of the whole Europe, actually. And this, the peace will be there only if the global leadership will be there. And I think that there's not such leadership. We don't see a real leadership on the international level. There's no something like a Marshall Plan towards Ukraine that happened after World War II towards the Europe from the United States of America, when Marshall Plan aims was not only to rebuild the economics, but it was about building the whole Western world as a alternative to the communist world. And I think at the moment we are lacking this leadership, and without it, it will be very difficult to deal with the situation. I would stop here and would be ready to answer your questions.
Thank you, Svitlana, for a very insightful presentation and very timely. As we are here, the coalition talks are ongoing. I mean, you mentioned the transparency of the talks. I mean, some of the things that I'm hearing from my contacts and my friends is maybe, I mean, in terms of it's a very difficult talks, even starting from the role of Prime Minister, and will it be 5 parties in the coalition? Because you mentioned 3, but what about the other 2? I mean, will Yulia Tymoshenko's party, Batkyushina, and will the Oleg Lyashko party also be? And I mean, in terms of even some of the individuals, I mean, what role will Yulia Tymoshenko play in this party? I mean, one of the thoughts yesterday, she become Minister of Foreign Affairs. So interesting. So my question is, I mean, the coalition, we're talking about 5 parties, and I mean, in terms of Prime Minister, who do you think will still become Prime Minister, and what is the role of Yulia Tymoshenko in the new cabinet of ministers?
It's an easy question. First, we will have 5 forces within the coalition, and the political parties are very clear with their messages that they're going to take a strong responsibility under the coalition, and Yulia Tymoshenko and Oleg Lyashko will be there. And as I said, for example, I personally has a lot of passion towards, for example, Lyashko. I don't believe that he is a democratic party. I believe he is a quasi-democratic party, because during the EuroMaidan, Lyashko was the only, and even before, during Yanukovych time, he was the only hero of all the political TV shows that was, for example, shown by Inter channel, that belongs to Mr. Levashkin. And the heroes of these political TV shows were chosen manually. And of course, Mr. Lyashko was there at every single political TV show. So I don't believe that he is that, pro-European as we would like him to see. But what I see, that we need him in this coalition. And it will be a political compromise to have a strong coalition with more than 300 votes. Why? Because, as I said, we need to change the constitution. In order to move forward with all our reforms, and in particular, I will mention, it's about decentralization. It will need to change the constitution. And then about the, for example, members of the parliament immunity, to withdraw it, we will need the constitutional majority. And in order to build this new balance of the powers between executive and parliament and also president, we will also need to amend the constitution. So that's why Lyashko is in the coalition. And if he signs under the text, we will demand him to fulfill what he signed. This is a clear framework of the relationship. Now, who's going to be the Prime Minister? At the moment, everyone believes, and at least this is what we see and hear, that Mr. Yeltsin will be Prime Minister of Ukraine. I know that he is supported by a lot of Western countries, a lot of diplomats, and also he, their force won quite impressive electoral support. You know that they won 22% by the list. So we will have him as the Prime Minister.
So that's official?
No, that's not official. What is the rules applied here? No rules, okay. Very Ukrainian format of discussion then. Well, this is, as I said, it's a preliminary information, and this is what I can judge from what I hear and what we see. It's very often in Ukrainian politics that the last day everything is actually changed, and then on the day of the voting we will have something completely different. But I believe that this is not the case this time, because even within the political parties that are developing this coalition agreement is a very strong demand for transparency and internal democracy in terms of the defining and voting not only on the text of the coalition but also with the positions within the ministries. And finally, Yulia Tymoshenko. Well, she... Okay, where were you? Let me quote her, it will be easier. She said that she will sign and she will support the coalition agreement. She said that she will not be in the opposition. This is a formal and official quotation. And she said that she sees her as a partner to the president and to prime minister. But at the same time, she refused, at least publicly, from all of the positions in the cabinet of ministry. So talking about the foreign minister, that's news for me, but we'll see.
Okay, I'd like to open up to the floor now. Yes, please, Professor.
Alan Riley, City University. My question is about how Ukraine is going to cope with both reform and war. Because one of the arguments about why Vladimir Putin is pushing on with war is to stop the Ukrainians reforming. And it seems to me that what is actually required of the new Ukrainian political class is a degree of almost Churchillian determination to both relentlessly wage war and at the same time reform the state. I use Churchill because I'm thinking of the fact that the British reformed their welfare state and had the Beveridge Report and created all the beginnings of the post-war reforms whilst also waging war. And it seems to me that it is almost a Churchillian objective that you have to reach, and you need almost Churchillian determination to deliver it. And that's the question that I have, is the Ukrainian political class ready to be Churchillian in order to deliver what they have to deliver to deal with war and reform?
It's a great question, I think, and I would answer that I believe that in order to win the war, you actually have to implement the reforms. And it's the only answer that is there to the war and to the Russians. And, you know, because it's simple. If you want a development, and you want to show to all, even people that live in Crimea, and that people that live in the eastern part of Ukraine, that to show them that we are moving forward, we need to change the rules in our economics. We need to open up the possibilities for our business to develop. We need to fight corruption finally, because that's why people went into the streets. Because that's why people still is waiting from our government and our president these real changes. And also we need a new judicial system. It was never the case where you could find actually justice within the court. You know, judicial system. It's funny, I will tell you that it was one of the reforms that we adopted right after EuroMaidan on the lustration of the judicial system. And we called it on the restoration of the trust in the judicial system. And then we believed that all those people who were involved and who were responsible for taking the decision during EuroMaidan to, for example, to put in prison activists, yeah, they will be punished. But what happened after we adopted this fantastic law? And well, yeah, I have to a little bit explain about the mechanism of these illustrations. So what we voted on is that now the courts could choose their heads themselves, and they will be not appointed by any other president or any other institutions. So we gave self-governance to the courts. And we believe that people the judges will take this responsibility and will delegate this function to someone who is dignitary, dignified enough to do this function. But suddenly we realized that approximately 90% of those judges who were actually responsible for all those did during EuroMaidan, they were again re-elected by the court. So by that I just want to show you how big our problem is, and how that sometimes the mechanisms that we think that will work, they won't. So we have 8,500 judges in the country. So we don't, what we need is not just to re-elect their heads, but to completely change the whole body of the courts. And this is what is needed in order to move forward with the reforms and to show to the whole society, but including eastern part of Ukraine and Crimea, that we are a different country.
I've had a business in Kiev for 10 years. I know you have a lot of problems. This is a crazy year, but I had a question about the economy. I saw the hryvnia now is 15.8 to the dollar, and I know your reserves have gone down dramatically, especially in the last 6 months. Is there any talk of debt relief with the IMF and your creditors, or is it too soon? And maybe that's an economic question, but Ukraine has too much debt and not enough cash, and is there any hope of debt relief in the coming years? That's really it.
Thank you. Well, you defined the problem, and it's right. And business is really in a very tough situation. And the whole reform process is actually about opening the possibilities for business. But answering your question, to be honest, I'm not an expert in it. It's difficult to say. I haven't heard that we have this kind of talks. Now, I would say that most of the efforts and talks are now focused on the actually economic reforms itself. Because to be honest, in last 12 months, as I've mentioned, we adopted a number of the legislation about judicial system and anti-corruption and freedom of speech and so on, but not within economic sphere. And this talks about, for example, taxes. There were a lot of talks, but nothing yet done. And business are those groups that are very, I would say, critical now, and we hear a lot of critics from their side that they are already tired of waiting. So we don't have time. We are running out of time, and I think it will be first package when we'll have first session of the Parliament to come up with it and to introduce some very concrete plan of what actually we are going to do. Thank you.
I mean, in terms of economists, we have one of the leading economists, Ukrainian economists here, Mr. Alexander. I will ask you, Chief Economist from the European Bank of Reconstruction.
Thank you for coming to speak with us. Actually, I have two questions. One, I know that there are intense negotiations on the agreement, the coalition agreement, which, if it all goes well, will be really a kind of a platform or a part that missed actually at the time of the elections. So could you say a few words? What are these highlights? What do you expect from this coalition agreement? What would we see from it? And then the other thing is more of an observation. Unfortunately, those of us who are Ukrainians living in the West, we have to, on a daily basis, face people. Some of them are, in general, favorably thinking about Ukraine and the Ukraine's strive to become European. At the same time, they often ask questions that are very difficult questions, or make difficult observations. And one of them is that Ukraine is the most corrupt country in Europe. And they are saying that they cannot imagine their children, or children of their families, to ever die for the most corrupt country in Europe. So what is it that, when are we going to be able to say that Ukraine is not the most corrupt country in Europe? And so far in the last 6 months, a lot has been discussed about anti-corruption, but unfortunately, Ukraine remains the most corrupt country in Europe 6 months after Maidan movement ended. So this is both a question, but also a point, that without addressing it, unfortunately, there will be no real deep alliance. You need to win the hearts of people and differentiate Ukraine, and whatever, war or no war, without it, we're all dead. You know, there is not going to be support from Western people for Ukraine.
Thank you so much for these questions. Well, first of all, about the coalition, I actually touched it in my speech, but very shortly I will repeat a couple of things, main things. First, as I said, it will be an agenda for the country for the next 3-5 years. And I believe it's first time in the history of all our Ukrainian politics when we will have a binding document that will be considered very seriously by all of the partners. That's why it's been taking time for so long to develop it, because as you know, a couple of weeks already, people are working on it. Secondly, I said that it is public. And you know that first it was introduced, it was a little bit clumsy, there was some scandal of why it was introduced, and people from other parties didn't participate in the elaboration of the text. So after that, all of the parties agreed that they will form working groups, and the working groups will be working on the appropriate components in there. So, and it's from what I see within these working groups, that really people, best minds in the country are working, and they try to find the compromises, and they try to write not just something, let's do anti-corruption reform, but they put there a very concrete vision of what does it mean, and what they agree upon. It's also very important, because they understand that if they write it, tomorrow they're going to vote for it, and if they don't vote, they will have either to dissolve the coalition, or the Prime Minister has to resign if, for example, he submits the package of these reforms. So it's very important. And finally, it's a public process, and it's also very important. Let me just mention that last week we had a huge meeting with all the experts that wanted to participate in this process. Bloc Petro Poroshenko, the leading party who introduced the draft of the coalition agreement. We invited these all experts, and they came with all their proposals in different spheres, in like 20 or 25 spheres. And they submitted on education, on science, on security, on humanitarian sphere. And they submitted all those proposals that they believe had to be there and was not there. And all these proposals are being considered very seriously, and really they are there, and now we work with that document. So, as I said, I use this term as a reserved optimist. This is how I evaluate now the work on the coalition. With regards to the corruption, well, I completely agree with you. The only thing is that what I can say, where is my optimism, that if you know, a couple of weeks, I believe the greatest legislation in the sphere of anti-corruption was adopted. I think that we had never so far such serious legislation in the sphere of anti-corruption. And it was submitted by the President, but it was written by activists, and it was written by experts from Reanimation Package of Reform. I'm one of the founders of this civic initiative. I have to say that during EuroMaidan, yet there 9 months ago, we had a coalition of all analytical centers in the country that agreed to develop the agenda for the country. And we felt that we have this window of opportunity where we can come and say, look, you say that you're different, you say that you're a pro-democratic government, so take it and go with it to the parliament. And President did, by the way. And I also think that it's a good example of how influential civil society is. And this anti-corruption bureau that we have now, and this new policy towards the declaration on assets, income states, and the transparency, and public procurement, and so on and so forth, are really very strong. Then the next step of the implementation of it, but it's also, now it's about our forces, security services, and also judicial system, and also journalists, and also civil society to monitor and to hold the government accountable. I was one of the activists that was demanding this declaration on assets to be transparent. And we had this movement, I said about it already, for 3 years. But then when we when I was a candidate, I came to the headquarters, and it was for the first time in my life when I was filling in the declaration on asset. And then I called the lawyer from the party to help me with how to do that. And when I called him, he said, you know, it's very important that you write everything you have, because it was demanded by this CHESNO movement, the initiative that I founded. So they will dig it up, believe me. And he didn't know that it's me that I was calling him. So it was funny. And then, to be honest, we met some resistance within our party, whether we have to disclose them or not. And why? Because the justification behind this was that, you know, some MPs are very rich, so people will criticize us for being rich. But then the majority of the party, of course, they said it's unacceptable. This is actually why we came here, so we will do that. And so I'm just trying to show that it's one small step towards the new policies and new culture, even within the party, a ruling party. But it's this step into the right direction. And we need a lot of these kind of steps. And having these young people within these old parties, I think it's a good factor of moving forward. The last point, you said that people are dying for corrupt country, but people are dying for the future of the country. And I think it's important thing.
Just touching on that point, I mean, Stop Censorship yesterday announced that the Ombudsman for Business would be a non-Ukrainian, an expert. Can you elaborate on that at all?
I read it as you did,
okay.
From press, so I don't know about it. But I believe the general reflection behind it is that we have a lot of people, well, you know, that studied abroad, and we have even the coalition of so-called professional government. This is an association of several thousands of people that are alumni of the best universities in the world. And they made a public statement, and they also offered government and parliament to involve people from these universities, alumni, that are ready to give up with their salaries and with their job, and to go to government and to work for several years in order to change the country.
Please, see a few hands, please.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Slava Gromnik from a company called PAI. Svitlana, you're a journalist, and journalism, as you know, at least in this country, is a watchdog, working on behalf of society to scrutinize the government and the parliament. You're obviously a professional journalist, and now you are a member of parliament. There are quite a few other fellow Ukrainians, Mustafa Naim and other journalists, who decided for whatever reason to go to the parliament. And I know that public opinion in Ukraine is divided, but it was a smart move. Don't you think, as a journalist, that the media scrutiny of the government and parliament is now undermined, whilst the professional journalists are assuming the political career?
I think we need update of Ukrainian politics as well as update of Ukrainian media. We need to have new generation in the politics, but we also have to have new generation in media. Because as a professional journalist, I have to tell you that we have none less problems in media than in politics. And actually those problems in journalism, in media, were partially the factors that allowed politicians to be so corrupt and to be so not accountable. And I think that, you know, it's just a couple of months ago, we didn't really have a major media channel where you could work as a journalist and to tell the truth, because you will be definitely persecuted, or you will be fired, or you won't be allowed to write or to show what you really want and in what you really believe. And this is why people in the East, especially, a lot of people in the East, but on the national level, didn't know what is happening in the country and believed in a totally different picture. This is why we had so, you know, this I called institutionalized civil society in Kyiv, these islands of those in avant-garde of the reforms, in avant-garde of EuroMaidan, and so much less understanding on the regional level. I will share with you one story which actually touched me a lot. When I became a candidate for the for the member of the parliament, I made a campaign in all of the regions. So I moved all over the country. And when we came to Mykolaiv, and I went to TV channel, and the journalist said, when we came there, he said, okay, so please tell me what questions should I ask you? And I didn't understand her question in the beginning. I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, you know, we have this practice. If you're a politician, ruling party, you know, you come and you dictate us what we should ask. And I said, but you know, it's not the case. We wouldn't agree even to do that. And then she said, you know, but I don't know what to ask you then. And then, you know what we did? We did probably not very nicely, and I was with Mustafa. But what we did is maybe the biggest lessons in her life. We had a live air, and we started our conversation. And then Mustafa said, you know, there are a lot of problems, but number of the problems are not imposed from the above, not caused because of the president or by the prime minister, but a lot of problems live in our minds. And for example, some journalists during our original campaign are asking us what kind of questions should we be asked. And it's, you know, he said it directly to the face of the journalist who said it. So my answer to you is that we need a strong institute of media in the country. And I believe that most of the changes that we had in politics were caused because we had these independent islands in journalism. And more we have independent journalists, more we have independent politicians.
Yeah, please.
My name is Nadia, I'm a law student. So my question is kind of related to the previous one. The war which we have now in Ukraine is often called hybrid war as well. So there's a new parliament thought about things what can be done in this area, media, introducing something new to fight the propaganda which we are getting and facing here in the West as well. And probably the second question would be regarding the draft of the coalition agreement which you had. Is there any question of Crimea in that? Because in the previous draft which we've seen, there were not a single word about Crimea. So has it been redrafted? If there are any things about prosecution of those who are responsible for deaths and about misogyny as well?
Thank you. Well, talking about Crimea, yes, indeed, we have a live, dynamic debate, lively debate on that the coalition agreement lacks this concrete intention that we have to bring it back, and I think it will be there. This is first answer. Secondly, about propaganda, I have to say that there is now some talks that maybe we have to Ministry of Information, to be honest. And then I've heard it as a journalist. I was shocked a little bit, because Ministry of Information is something from Soviet times, you know, and I really, yeah, and I really don't think that in order to fight the propaganda, you have to create the propaganda. So my recipe would be to have a qualitative and independent journalism. In order to fight propaganda, you have to have BBC. You have to have journalists that would not fulfill the will of the president or prime minister or whoever, but will do just a real and just coverage of what is happening. And people would respect those independent institutions of media. This is what we need, where journalists would see very clearly where is the material is ordered and where it's really independent. I have to, once again, it's probably inside, but how our media works, which I don't like, and I criticize it, and even publicly, so I allow it to say it. All our political TV shows has so-called quotas, you know, when journalists do not, or like, let's say, political TV show teams, they do not call politicians personally, but they call headquarters of the parties, and they say, so whom would you delegate today to us? And the party, whatever, head of the party would decide, okay, today we'll send Svitlana because she behaved good, so we will allow her to talk on behalf of our party. but you know, it takes away the whole principle of the real discussion in the society. It's manipulated. It's manually crafted. It's created by someone's, you know, understanding of what has to be said and how has to be said and whom has to be said. But that's not right. And that's why I think that public broadcasting system, this is what is going to change the whole approach. And you know that Slavek Schuster is the most famous political TV show that has a great impact on the discussion in Ukrainian society. But it's not, the principles is based on, it's not right. And we have to cancel, we have to break these quotas. And only then we will have this real discussion that will reflect what is happening in the country. And this is debate, the best recipe against the propaganda in the country.
Yeah.
You said that we have a direct war, it's not a hybrid war. And then we are talking about the quality of journalism, the quality of news. This is all great, but every time I go back to Ukraine, I notice on basically switching on the TV that there is no war in the country. There are entertainment programs, there are Russian TVs and soap operas, and no changes for months and months again. This is as urgent as arming our guys at the front line. So the question is, where is it in the pecking line, in the order of reforms? It should be number one. Do you see it being number one?
Thank you. I do see it, and it is also in the coalition agreement. There will be the whole component on the security, and it will be reflected there. But let me comment a little bit on it. Well, first of all, I would disagree that nothing changed in the recent months. A lot of things changed, and last December, when you switched on 1+1 or I don't know Interchannel, you would see a totally different picture. And people in the streets were called, you know, these grant eaters or representatives of American government. I mean, talking about the activists at EuroMaidan. But the situation changed, and now our oligarchs do not serve anymore Yanukovych or the system or the family, but they understand that they are fighting for the country. Well, there are another side effect. They fight against each other. But anyway, most of the news, let's say, most of the news, most of the political TV shows, most of the political debate are connected to the war, and this topic is always there, and it is being discussed in a national interest way. That's for sure. Now, talking about a general situation with the quality and the whole system of how should it work. Let me just mention that we have very intransparent media market. And this is one of the priority, is to basically make the legislation on the transparency of media ownership. This is what we need in order to not to allow them to monopolize media market. Because when they do that, you know that media was never a business in Ukraine. It was just a secondary instrument to help the business, the financial groups to serve their business and political interests. So media are not profitable in Ukraine. Even Interchannel, other TV channels, from what I've heard, they are not profitable. They don't bring money. They bring just the potential, the possibility to influence the decisions on other things that will bring you money enough to cover the expenses of media. But we have to change it. And only then media will work as a real institute and will have these independent talks that you're talking about, these serious talks. Then also, actually, we don't have media market at all. And as a journalist, you can't earn money, really. You can't be successful. Let's take Mustafa. Hi, Mustafa. I mean, if he's watching us. You know the latest scandal with Mustafa, and it's one of the just examples that reflects on the situation, is that he said that MPs don't, that the MP's salary have to be increased. And at the moment, you know that it's approximately 5,000 hryvnias. It's with today's rate, it's what, $300. So he said, it's not going to work, and I can't work there in the parliament with such a salary. And there was a huge scandal that everyone now is criticizing Mustafa because everyone earns even less than this, and he wants more as a new MP, so he's a bad guy. But my point is that one of the most influential journalists in Ukraine, one of the most successful journalists in Ukraine, journalists with a spine, with a heart, and with a strong mind, that never sacrificed his values, and was fired from, for example, he left Schuster Live when he didn't agree with him, he left TVI when it was raided, you know that perfectly well, and he didn't earn neither for an apartment nor for a car. He is the greatest journalist in the country that has nothing. By this, I just want to show you that there are no possibilities for journalists to be realized. So we have to bring these business incentives, this incentive of being realized and being successful. And then we will have independent journalists, and then so they will have something to lose, you know. And then we will have these institutions that will be able to bring a real qualitative journalist in Ukraine. When I was asked by one journalist what is the role of the oligarchs in this war, I said, unfortunately, positive. And why did I say that? Because, to be honest, I think that at the moment, Ukrainian government was not able to win this war and is not able to move with the efficient, successful fight without oligarch support. Because they are a great institute not only of the resources, but also of the authority, of the instrument, of the influence, of the power. And Kolomoisky, Pinchuk, and Akhmetov, and others, you can't say that they are just those oligarchs that are stealing and that are earning money. But at the moment, number of the oligarchs, they are part of our fight. The only thing that the power, the government, should be very clear that this is where we're together, but when the fight is over, it's going to be different. But the main thing is that we don't have to eliminate them or to send them to the moon. But the main thing is that we have to, there has to be a concept of this. And my concept is that we have to transform the Institute of Oligarchs into the Institute of Big Business. That's the main answer. And what will allow us to do that? It's rules. To make them play not with the rules but by the rules. That's the main thing. And how to do this? On the different levels you have to impose those rules. For example, let's say politics. First of all, we have to exclude oligarchic money from the politics. How do you do that? First, it's about budget financing of the parties. It's about giving the parties the possibility to be in the equal conditions. I have to be honest, and we said it publicly everywhere, including to Bloc Petro Poroshenko and Mr. President himself, that if we had different electoral legislation, we would have never joined Bloc Petro Poroshenko, but we would have go there ourselves. There were, as I said, 30% of those people who were running for these elections was under 35. And I feel that they are my colleagues, those people, my heroes, I don't know, my co-thinkers. And I would like to make a party with them, but I didn't have chance. Why? Because in order to compete with Bloc Petro Poroshenko, I have to have at least $10 million, or even much more actually, but at least those that are public and disclosed, it's $10 million. In order to have them, I have to go to the oligarch. But then, why I'm you? Why I'm different? Why do you have to have so big money? Because today, 80%, and it's official numbers, of all those money that are spent to the political campaigns during the electoral process are paid for TV advertisement. So politicians they compete in TV, you know. And what we have to make, it's another change that we are also raising, is to abolish a TV advertisement during political campaign, or at least decrease it to the extent where new parties that do not have this oligarchic support, but will have just the support of the middle class, will allow themselves also to go and to have this political campaign. And finally, it's about transparency. Until so far, it was never the case when political parties on candidate of the president to the presidency would disclose their financial reports before the elections and even after the election. It was never the case. As a voter, in order, for example, to see how much money the president spent in the party spent in 2012, 12, for example. I'll tell you, because we were doing that as an activist, and it's ridiculous from UK point of view. So, in order to find out how much money Yanukovych spent for his campaign, first, you will never find it on the internet. It doesn't exist there, even on the site of Central Electoral Committee. Secondly, you have to be a journalist, you have to have a press card in order to get into the archive, a special archive, that these documents are reserved. And thirdly, you can't just see this document. You have to pay before you see this document. 40 hryvnias for one document. So, and by the way, you can't photograph it. No, you can only copy it with the this permission of the service that is working there. So, and why is that? Of course, because if you read it properly, you will find a lot of interesting information. And if you submit this information to the prosecutor officer, they will probably say, this is not true, or this is not right. And this is what we found, a lot of these facts in Yanukovych's financial reports. But of course, well, never the court was proceeding it into the right way. But that's the third thing that has to be done with the electoral campaign, is to make it transparent. So only then, well, another thing is to decrease the threshold for the parties. Only then we will take the money, take the oligarchic money from the politics. We will decrease them at least. We will make it possible for new parties, for emergent parties, because we have a number of the parties that were born before EuroMaidan, during or after, but they have no chance to compete with those money, as you say. So, but I just elaborated about how take money from the political campaign and from politics, basically. There are other things that we have to do. There are other rules that we have to build with regards to how transform this institute of the oligarchs into the big business. But the main rule is rules. Okay.
Let's take two final questions. There's two hands. So 1 and 2. Yeah, please. Someone.
I admire your enthusiasm and your energy, but the task that is in front of you is huge. And although I can see optimism, you seem to be very well aware of the problems that there are there. And whatever you try and change, there will be lots of people interested in that change not happening. So my question is, what are you going to do? What is your strategy when you come to a point when you hit a brick wall, and there'll be, I'm sure there'll be points like that in your career? It's not easy to do what you're trying to do. It sounds lovely, but we know that it's not easy. And my second question is the reforms. It's all great, and let's say that you manage to pull them through the parliament. How are you going to implement them? In my view, the reforms have to happen in people's heads. And I've just came back from Ukraine, and I can tell you for sure, the percentage of people who are prepared to change is still very low. The majority of people are still very Soviet-type thinking people. Even the young people, the majority are just indifferent. How do you think you're going to implement these reforms? Thanks.
Thank you. Well, with regards to brick walls, to be honest, I think that the most, I don't know, difficult parts were, or maybe not. But okay, let me start with that. In December of 2013, they opened a criminal case against my civil society organization that I was running. I was an executive director. But at that time, I had a lot of people who came to me and said, "You need to leave. They will imprison you, and we're not going to win. Look at the situation. Nothing will change." But I decided, no, I'm not going to go. And if it happens, then it will be my fight. This is what I choose. So it's about choices. And whether it was scary, it was a bit scary, and it was also a bit scary during EuroMaidan that they were trying to disperse when there were a lot of these soldiers, and where I saw with my own eyes how people were dying there, you know. But once again, it's your choice. It's what you choose. So to be honest, I don't think that any of the people within this political system is going to shoot us or to imprison us, at least. So my answer would be that there are no such brick walls already anymore. There is a lot of resistance and unwillingness and everything else that you mentioned, and I completely agree with you. But the only way to move forward is to close your eyes and just go. This is my recipe, and I have to tell you that as an executive director, I was earning 4 times more money, for example, as I'm going to earn as MP. And everyone loved me because I was activist and journalist, and everyone loves activists and journalists. But everyone hates politicians, by the way. So, but just recently, I met a man who was a dissident. He's 85. 15 years he spent into the Soviet camps. His name is Yevhen Svitlana, you probably know him. He's, he's 85, he's an old man, but he's participating in all the actions. He's spending a lot of time with young people. He's doing something. He doesn't give up. And what he said is an interesting thing. He said, we have this national mobilization today, and everyone decides how he participates in this war. But it's not necessarily to be a soldier. You can give money, you can help to build the refugees' shelters, or you can just take a small steps just around you at your own place. And so I believe that now, when civil society and journalists went into the politics, it's the way of how they mobilize themselves in order to bring changes into the country. And talking about the readiness of the society to change themselves, I would disagree with you. To be honest, I've seen a couple of opinion polls, like investigations, deep analysis of what people are thinking, and there is this readiness amongst the majority, or amongst those middle class, amongst the business. They are ready now to go from the shadow and say, and I have a lot of friends from business, and none of them, by the way, live in a legal way, because everyone has to hide something, everyone has to find the schemes or the possibilities to survive, basically, to make it sustainable. But they said, all of them say, I'm ready to pay all the debt taxes, but please create me the conditions so that I don't lose everyone, I don't have to fire all people. And this is the main demand. So I think, and you're right, there are a lot of people like grandmothers and pensioners and those that are the poorest, and they are not ready to move forward. But I'm talking about those elites, I'm talking about the middle class that are ready, and they are there to take this responsibility. Now the ball is on the side of the politicians to offer it.
Okay, and final question at the back.
This is like a follow-on to the question about reform and society in Ukraine. And now that Svoboda is not a party in parliament, one of the last bills was to recognise all UPA as war heroes and war veterans during the fight for Ukrainian independence back in 1940, 45, or even longer, to 1955. So how do you think, from your perspective, the coalition would carry on with that? Because that is part of Ukrainian history and Ukrainian culture. One of the, and this brings us back to the Kyiv-Maidan, one of the chants of Maidan, which was one of the chants of the Ukrainian insurgency, was glory to the heroes, glory to Ukraine, slava Ukraini, slava heroyam. And that is part of civil society, and that chant didn't just arise from nowhere, it came from somewhere. It came from Ukrainian history. So I think that that was part of civil society, trying to encourage politicians to follow that path. And it was a shame that in the last parliament that Svoboda party didn't get that bill through just for 10 or 20 votes. So good. Yeah. So how do you think about that? And a little question. What do you think about the Communist Party not being in Parliament for the first time?
Right.
Thank you.
We'll take one final question at the back. Andriy Maximovich, and then.
Svitlana, thank you very much for the inspirational speech. Inspiration probably for all of us. Actually, I had two. Well, I'll shorten it to one question. You mentioned that it's very difficult to say or to judge what should be done with regard to the war in the eastern Ukraine that we have. But in your opinion, with the currently available information that you have, what do you think are the 3 things that Ukraine should do in eastern Ukraine to basically manage the situation? Thank you.
So about UNPA, as you know, it was voted, but failed. So I think, to be honest, I think they will have this time the majority to vote about it. I don't see really a point here. A small comment on it, that to be honest, I believe that very often we can't find enough of the wisdom and political will to find things that we have to unite in the future. And but you're right. Reflecting the history and reconsideration of the history is a very important part. And moreover, I have to say that in this coalition agreement, we will have the whole component about humanitarian policies, and there will be a lot of things about building this understanding of Ukraine as well, about this education on the history and other things, which is important, I think. Now, about the communists, I'm really very happy that it was not banned. But that it was not banned by the court, that because there was this intention, but it was actually banned by the society. It's a real democracy. It means that we are a society that just cut this route, and it's a good sign, I think. Talking about Russia, about 3 things that we have to do. Well. I will start with international role. I think that we, as politicians, we as businessmen, we as activists, have to actually help for the international leadership to be much stronger. Because let's take even the 1939, when Russia annexed Finland, right? It was excluded from the League of Nations, for example. But what we see, Russia violated a lot of rules of the Council of Europe, but it was not excluded. And there is a debate, but there is no readiness to do that. Then also, as you know, we have to also reconsider with this issue, this crisis that is happening in Ukraine. I believe that actually the West moved into the East. And in the East we have the fight for the international values, for the democratic values that are with regards to all of us. And I think that we have to work harder in order to reconsider the roles of United Nations organization, about European Union role, NATO role, and so on. Because Budapest Memorandum, that didn't work, and the Budapest Memorandum that turned out to be just a paper that is, that is cheaper than the piece of paper that it was written on, means that international treaties do not work. That the security architecture of the world is actually not understandable, is not clear. What is there? What are the rules? And these rules have to be reconsidered. But my point is that we have to work harder in these European capitals and also on the international level in order to move international leaders to express their role stronger. And I really think that Russia is working very well with all of their money that they invested in their PR firms, in their consultancy, and in their projects all over the world, in their cultural projects, that we actually underestimate how important to use this soft power in order to build this international leadership, in order to make world thinking more strategically about this. Second point, it's of course about our internal actions. And as I've said, the reforming of the country is the first answer to how we should win this war. And it's number one, is to make it successful, is to move forward to is to Europeanize faster, is to Westernize faster. But also the whole doctrine, right, of the security has to be reconsidered. The army has to be now has to become the key institution, or maybe a very important institution in the whole system of Ukrainian power. And there are a lot of reforms that we can do. It's about оборонно-промисловий complex is how to translate that.
The military and defense.
Yes, it's about the infrastructure. But it's about also our information rule. It's about all these factors together. And the most difficult part that we have to move on the parallel with all of these things. We can't do one by one, but we have to do it all together. You know, there is this famous Ukrainian proverb that Ukraine never misses a chance to miss a chance. This time, we can't miss this chance. We just have no right.
Right, well, ladies and gentlemen. On that note, all that I can say is on behalf of everybody is to Svitlana, to thank you. I mean, it's inspirational to see a young female Ukrainian politician standing here in London and delivering the messages, and I think it gives us great hope, it gives great credibility to the future of the country. We've been following everything you've been doing over the last many years. As you say, we've loved the stuff you've been doing, and we hope to be able to continue loving now the big challenges that you and the new team are bringing into Parliament. So you have many friends here in London. We will be trying here to support you, and we wish you all the very best of success. So thank you.
Thank you very much.